Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be yet another Unsolved Mysteries video for you guys. I really like talking about unsolved mysteries because of course someone out there always knows some answer. So if I can be of any help to any of these cases, like that would be really cool, because a lot of these cases just remain unsolved for long periods of time, or just to get people talking about these cases again. But without further ado, let's get into it. The first unsolved mystery we're going to be talking about happened on Thanksgiving of 1969 when 22-year-old Betsy Aardsma was sadly stabbed to death at the Penn Library at Penn State University. So Betsy had spent Thanksgiving Day with her boyfriend in Hershey, Pennsylvania. She ended up going back to campus early to finish an assignment. November 28th of 1969, Betsy and her roommate Sharon walked to the library at Penn State just to get work done and study. It was just after 4:45 p.m. when witnesses claimed that they heard books falling, which is really scary because obviously if you don't hear screaming or anything and you just hear books falling, you would think that nothing was really that wrong. But Betsy was found under a pile of these books. Betsy was rushed to the student hospital and she was declared dead at the hospital. Mike Simmers, who was a trooper with Pennsylvania State, says that he recalls this day super vividly. Mike claims that he dealt with a lot of drug busts or anti-war protests at that time, especially at Penn State. When they got a call saying that it was a medical emergency, he assumed that a young girl had a seizure or fainted. Mike Simmers claims that when he got to the crime scene, that it was already immediately tampered with. Everything had been cleaned up, all the books had been reshelved. It was just super strange. Mike Simmers went to the hospital. That was when he discovered that it was actually a homicide. So he immediately called for backup and headed back to the library. But like I said, the books had been reshelved, the floors had been mopped. It was super strange that they felt this urgency to do that. I feel like something super traumatic is happening in a library. Like that's the last thing that would be on their mind. But that's what happened. The thing that's weird to me is that the students were allowed to just walk through the area like nothing happened, and which also meant that a lot of the key eyewitnesses had already walked away at this point. And so there weren't a lot of people left to question. It's just super unprofessional because obviously normally in such a terrible crime scene, people are going to be asked to stick around to answer questions. It's like a huge thing to not tamper with a crime scene, so I don't really understand why that was happening. Luckily, they were able to talk to some of the witnesses, though. The witness had a sketch drawn up. Basically, they said that they saw this man running away. One of the witnesses claimed that they saw a man running away from the crime scene. They ended up being able to draw a police sketch from it. However, nothing ever came of it. Mike Simmers really believes that this person who killed Betsy was someone who knew her. I think it makes sense because it obviously seems like such a random crime. Like she's just at a library on Thanksgiving. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I feel like typically in cases like this, it's usually perpetuated by someone that they know. Simmers said, quote, "Everyone either wants to be her friend or wanted to date her, but she was focused on her schooling and she didn't entertain the boys who had crushes on her." There had been countless rumors, like basically the general consensus of who killed Betsy was someone who tried to, hook up with her, date her, whatever. She didn't want to because she had a boyfriend and wanted to live her own life. So it's believed that this person who she rejected is the person who killed her, which is so terrifying and really sad. There was also a few speculations that Ted Bundy was the person who killed Betsy, though the police didn't see much correlation between the murders. Apparently Ted Bundy was in the area at this time, so it would have been possible, but probably pretty unlikely. It's also very widely believed that the murder was completely unsolved and still remains unsolved because of the tampering of the crime scene. I feel like that's such a crucial thing that I think most people know or should know, is that like if something terrible like that happens, tampering with the crime scene can greatly affect the outcome of the investigation. It's terrible because obviously the people in the library was super unprofessional and it wasn't secured whatsoever, and probably one of the reasons why this case remains unsolved. I just think that this is so terrifying and so sad for Betsy and her family. Like I can't imagine, of course, being Thanksgiving, so focused on her schoolwork that she's you know, taking time on her holiday essentially to go study at the library. Like, it's such a simple thing that is so terrifying to think about. Also really scary because people think that it's someone that she just rejected, which is so terrifying. Like, I want to reiterate how scary that actually is. That was honestly a very, very scary story. It makes sense that it's someone who personally knew her. I don't think it was Ted Bundy. I don't necessarily think that the people in the library like maybe had an inside connection or knew who this person was or like anything like that. I mean, it's a possibility. I think that that would be an interesting take on the whole thing, but I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I think that they probably just weren't aware what you have to do with a crime scene and stuff, and like not to like clean it up before the police have time to investigate. It's also possible that like, I feel like a lot of students work in libraries, so it's possible that they were, you know, students and didn't even think like, oh, like let's leave this so that the police can see it intact. But I think this story is really terrifying and I hope it one day gets solved. It was so long ago, I just don't know if that'll happen. The next story is so terrifying, I can't even imagine. It happened on December 6th of 1991. On December 6th of 1991, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas and 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison were working in, I can't believe it's yogurt, in Austin, Texas. They were getting ready to close the store when Jennifer's sister Sarah and their friend Amy came to meet them there and then head home together. And what happened next is literally so terrifying and horrible. Investigators believe that at least 2 men came into the store, tied up the girls, shot them to death, and then set the entire store on fire. Of course, setting the store on fire obviously destroyed a lot of the evidence, which again, anything tampering with any crime scene is going to greatly affect the investigation. This is such a terrifying story. I can't even imagine what those girls went through, you know, prior. That would just be awful. A man named John Jones worked for the Austin Police Department at the time, and he was the lead investigator on this case. Him and his team decided to track down all of the customers who had been at the store that day. Not only to see if they did anything, but mostly to see if they had seen anything suspicious. Multiple customers claimed that there were 2 men who looked very out of place. They were sitting in the shop just before the store closed. All of the witnesses' accounts, none of these men had ordered any yogurt. They actually just ordered drinks. This case remained unsolved, and in 1999, almost 8 years after the murders, there was actually a break in the case. And new investigators decided to re-examine an old lead. Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn were all teenagers at the time of the crime. They landed on the original investigator John Jones's radar very quickly. Maurice Pierce was arrested with a gun at a mall nearby the yogurt shop during 1991, so that was definitely a red flag on John Jones's radar. The boys were questioned at the time, but they were ultimately released due to lack of evidence. In 1999, this was when investigators decided to question them once again. 2 of them, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, ended up confessing to the yogurt shop murders. Also implicated Maurice Pierce and Forrest Wellborn in the process. All 4 men were arrested. It wasn't long before Springsteen and Scott ended up retracting their confessions and said that they were coerced into confessing. The charges were ultimately dropped against Pierce and Wellborn due to lack of evidence. Springsteen and Scott were the only 2 to go on trial, and they were convicted and sent to prison for 10 years before some new evidence arose. They decided to try some new DNA testing, and because they sadly assumed the girls had been sexually assaulted prior to being murdered, they were able to use some DNA samples, and they found a male DNA sample that did not match any of the 4 men, and ultimately the charges were dropped because of this. An attorney named Amber Farley, who was working on Springsteen and Scott's case, was really adamant that the police got it all wrong and that they were focused on the wrong people, and that they really needed to focus on these 2 unidentified men who were in the shop prior to closing. This attorney pointed out something that I found pretty interesting, which is that they spoke to 52 people who were in the yogurt shop from 4:30 till 11 p.m. Several of these witnesses described 2 guys in the same manner, and no one has seen them, heard from them, or spoken to them. And that is very suspicious. Men were described as out of place. They said that they were like leaning over the table and whispering to each other, basically like they didn't want anyone to hear what they were saying. This case is still on John Jones's mind. Even though he is long retired, it still haunts him to this day who these two men are. I think this case is really, really scary and terrifying, but also very interesting to think of who it could have been. Really strange with the fact that these 4 guys were arrested and then let go and literally went to jail for 10 years. Then the DNA evidence, it's just very, very confusing because why did they have a confession to doing this crime? Like, where did this confession come from? Maybe they know who did it. I really don't know. It is really, really terrifying and really sad that it's still unsolved. I feel so bad for their families, and I hope that one day with new technology it will be able to be solved. Obviously, if you have any information on any of them, I'll link down below like where you can send info. That is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below any unsolved mysteries that you want to know the answers to, or if you want to see me cover them in a video, I would love to know. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram because I'm always posting really dope ass shit on there. Subscribe for new videos every week, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.